The people closest to Dexter Morgan saw him as their anchor, their protector. But beneath his charm was a manipulative genius who turned love and trust into weapons to hide his darkest secrets. How did he deceive everyone who thought they truly knew him?
Sleeping, she was very, very sick, and that lousy dog was yapping at every leaf that blew down.
Harry Morgan was a man caught in one of the most unimaginable situations a parent could face. Picture this: finding your young son torturing animals with a cold, detached look in his eyes. For most parents, such a discovery would lead to frantic attempts to find help, therapy, intervention, or maybe even desperate prayers. But Harry wasn't like most parents. As a seasoned cop, he looked at Dexter's behavior through the lens of pragmatism rather than emotion. Harry didn't see a troubled child who needed healing. He saw a problem that demanded a solution. And that's how the infamous code was born.
Kill Davey, isn't it?
Judge said the bust wasn't righteous and let him walk.
The code was Harry's radical attempt to channel Dexter's violent urges in a controlled direction. On the surface, it was a moral framework, a set of rules designed to ensure Dexter only killed those who deserved it, like criminals who had slipped through the cracks of the justice system. Harry framed it as a way for Dexter to serve a greater good. But beneath this veneer of justice, the code was a survival manual. It wasn't just about who Dexter could kill, but also about how he could stay undetected while doing it. Harry taught Dexter to live a double life and to wear the perfect mask of normalcy. Dexter learned to mirror the emotions of those around him, to smile when others smiled, and to show concern even when he felt nothing. By doing so, he became a ghost, blending seamlessly into society. Harry's teachings shaped Dexter into a master manipulator long before he took his first life. By the time Dexter grew up, he was a blood spatter analyst at Miami Metro, known for his friendly demeanor and quick wit. He brought donuts to work, cracked jokes with colleagues, and seemed like the last person anyone would suspect of harboring dark secrets. Harry had done his job well, or so he thought. But creating the code and teaching Dexter to hide in plain sight came at a steep emotional cost. As Dexter grew older and the full weight of what Harry had created became clear, Harry's guilt started to consume him.
I can explain.
You and I had an understanding.
The breaking point came when Harry caught a teenage Dexter dismembering an animal with chilling precision. At that moment, Harry realized the monster he had tried to control was far more dangerous than he ever anticipated. The guilt of knowing he had molded Dexter into what he was, a highly functional killer, proved too much for Harry to bear. Overwhelmed by despair, he took his own life, leaving Dexter to navigate the code on his own.
Jeez, Deb. Where the hell do you keep...
Deborah Morgan's life revolved around her older brother Dexter. To her, he wasn't just family. He was a constant in a world that often felt chaotic and uncertain. From a young age, Deborah idolized Dexter. He was her rock, the one person she could trust without question. In her eyes, Dexter wasn't just her brother, he was her protector, someone who always had her back. She built her life around the belief that he would never let her down, and that belief shaped her entire sense of security. Deborah's unwavering faith in Dexter made her admire him in ways that went beyond the typical sibling bond. She saw him as a beacon of stability, the dependable older brother who always seemed to know what to do. This idealized image of Dexter became her moral compass, guiding her as she navigated the challenges of her career and personal life. As a police officer and later a detective, Deborah was passionate about justice and doing the right thing, values she believed were reflected in Dexter's character. But what happens when your guiding light turns out to be a storm in disguise?
Deb?
For Deborah, that revelation was nothing short of earth-shattering. The moment Deborah walked in on Dexter in the middle of a kill was the turning point of her life. She had always suspected there was something unusual about Dexter, but nothing could have prepared her for the horrifying reality. Standing in the stark contrast of that moment, the image of her beloved brother was shattered. The man she had idolized and trusted completely was suddenly a stranger, a cold and calculating predator. Her world didn't just crack, it collapsed entirely. Every assumption she had ever made about Dexter, about their relationship, about herself, came crashing down. For most people, such a discovery would lead to immediate disassociation, maybe even hatred. But Deborah wasn't like most people. Despite the horror of what she saw, she couldn't bring herself to turn against Dexter. Instead, she found herself caught in the grip of his manipulative genius. Dexter didn't beg for her forgiveness or attempt to justify his actions in the usual way. Instead, he reframed the narrative. He insisted that his actions were a form of justice, a way to protect the innocent by eliminating those who preyed on them. Deborah, desperate to make sense of the unthinkable, clung to this explanation. She told herself that Dexter's darkness had a purpose, that he wasn't just a killer, but someone who operated in the gray areas of morality to serve the greater good.
Paul's flaws. He paid the price for my dreams.
Rita Bennett was the kind of person who exuded warmth and hope, everything Dexter outwardly lacked. To the world, she seemed like his saving grace, the one person who could offer him redemption and light in an otherwise dark existence. To Dexter, however, Rita wasn't salvation. She was a shield. She was the perfect cover, a woman whose love and trust made him appear untouchably normal. With Rita by his side, Dexter could convincingly play the role of a devoted boyfriend and later husband, all while concealing his true, violent nature. Rita's life before Dexter had been riddled with pain and struggle. She was a survivor of an abusive marriage, a single mother doing her best to rebuild a stable home for her children. Her vulnerability made her easy for Dexter to approach, but it was her unwavering kindness that made her invaluable to him. Dexter knew he could use Rita's trusting nature to project the image of a loving family man. This facade wasn't just for appearances, it was critical to his survival. With Rita, Dexter could hide in plain sight, disarming anyone who might otherwise suspect him of being anything but the hardworking, mild-mannered, blood-spatter analyst everyone thought they knew. While Rita served as Dexter's mask of normalcy, her own life began to show signs of strain. Over time, she started noticing cracks in Dexter's facade. There were the late-night disappearances, the vague excuses, and the moments when he seemed emotionally distant, almost like a stranger in her home. Rita wasn't blind to these signs. Deep down, she knew something wasn't quite right, but she couldn't bring herself to confront it directly. Instead, she rationalized his behavior, telling herself that his detachment was a product of his difficult past or his demanding job. She convinced herself that he was the man she believed him to be, rather than face the uncomfortable truth that something darker might be lurking beneath the surface. This blind faith became Rita's greatest vulnerability. Her dream of creating a perfect family, a safe, loving home for her children and Dexter, kept her from seeing the danger she was in. She wanted so badly to believe in the possibility of happiness and stability that she ignored the growing evidence to the contrary. Rita's hope, while noble, left her unprepared for the harsh reality of Dexter's double life. She held on to an idealized version of him, a version that never truly existed, and it was this hope that ultimately placed her in harm's way.
Rita.
Rita's death at the hands of the Trinity Killer was one of the most devastating moments in Dexter's story. It was a direct consequence of his inability to separate his dark urges from his personal life. Trinity didn't kill Rita because of who she was, he killed her because of who Dexter was. Dexter's relentless pursuit of Trinity, a mission he undertook without fully considering the potential fallout, brought the killer into his family's orbit. Rita, who had no idea of the danger Dexter's secret life posed, became collateral damage in his twisted game of justice.
I just got home and found my wife dead in the bathtub.
Did you say your wife is dead?
Yes, I did. She has an approximately 1-inch incision midway up her right thigh dissecting the femoral artery.
For Dexter, Rita's death was a moment of profound duality. Outwardly, he grieved the loss of his wife, presenting himself as a devastated husband and father. But beneath the surface, her death represented something else: liberation. Without Rita, Dexter no longer had to maintain the exhausting facade of being the perfect husband. The daily effort to balance his double life, to juggle his role as a family man with his darker pursuits, was suddenly less complicated. Her death freed him from the constraints of his mask, even as it left him grappling with the guilt of knowing his actions had led to her demise. Hannah McKay and Lumen Pierce were two women who entered Dexter's life under vastly different circumstances. But their stories share a common thread. They became entwined with his darkness, believing they were his equals, only to discover that he always maintained control. Dexter's relationships with both women highlight his ability to manipulate even those who knew his true nature. turning what seemed like partnerships into carefully orchestrated power dynamics that served his needs above all else. Hannah McKay was unlike anyone Dexter had ever met. She wasn't an innocent bystander or a victim in need of rescue. She was a killer in her own right. This commonality formed the foundation of their bond. Hannah understood the parts of Dexter that he had to hide from the rest of the world. For her, their relationship felt profound, even liberating. She saw Dexter as a kindred spirit, someone who mirrored her capacity for violence and her moral ambiguity. To Hannah, their love was rare and transformative, built on an understanding that few could ever comprehend. For Dexter, however, the connection was more calculated. Hannah's trust and vulnerability were tools he could use to his advantage. While she believed their relationship was built on mutual respect, Dexter subtly maintained control at every turn. He positioned himself as someone she could confide in, someone who would protect her secrets while keeping his own hidden. Every moment of intimacy, every act of trust, was part of Dexter's strategy to keep her tethered to him. When Hannah thought she was steering their relationship as an equal, Dexter was quietly making decisions that ensured he always held the upper hand.
Said that you loved me.
I do.
Then why am I here?
You poisoned Deborah.
What made their dynamic particularly unsettling was the illusion of equality. On the surface, they appeared to be partners, two people bound by shared darkness. But beneath that facade, Dexter never allowed Hannah to truly hold power over him. He framed their love as something transcendent, but it was ultimately just another layer of manipulation. Hannah's devotion to Dexter became a means to an end, allowing him to use her as a shield, an ally, and even an accomplice when it suited him. She was drawn to the idea of being understood by someone like Dexter, but he used that connection to keep her dependent on him, ensuring that her choices always aligned with his needs. Lumen Pierce's relationship with Dexter was shaped by entirely different circumstances, but the outcome was strikingly similar. When Dexter met Lumen, she was a woman shattered by unimaginable trauma. Kidnapped, tortured, and left for dead, Lumen had survived, but was consumed by a need for vengeance. Dexter saw in her a reflection of his darkness, and he stepped into the role of her savior. He offered her the guidance and support she needed to hunt down the men who had hurt her, presenting himself as someone willing to help her when no one else could. For Lumen, Dexter's presence felt like salvation. He didn't just validate her pain, he gave her a path to reclaim her sense of power and control. She believed they were partners in a noble quest, two broken souls united by a common goal. But for Dexter, the partnership was far less altruistic. Helping Lumen gave him an excuse to indulge his violent urges under the guise of aiding her recovery. Every act of vengeance she carried out was one he orchestrated, ensuring that their actions aligned with his desires and methods. Dexter Morgan's brilliance as a manipulator didn't just stop at his family or romantic relationships. He extended his web of deception to his friends and colleagues at Miami Metro, crafting an image of himself so disarming and ordinary that even the most seasoned detectives never suspected the monster hiding in plain sight. Dexter's charm, humor, and reliability were his most effective weapons in keeping his secrets safe, and he wielded them masterfully. Take Vince Masuka and Angel Batista, for example. To these two, Dexter was the quirky, dependable blood spatter analyst who always brought donuts and cracked light-hearted jokes. Vince, with his offbeat sense of humor, never saw beyond the surface. To him, Dexter was just a bit socially awkward, a harmless nerd who enjoyed the scientific aspects of the job. Angel, on the other hand, saw Dexter as a genuinely good guy. He valued Dexter's loyalty and perceived him as a steadfast colleague, someone he could count on during Miami Metro's toughest cases. Dexter leaned into these perceptions, using his charm and humor to blend in seamlessly. He cultivated a persona that was so unthreatening, so endearing, that no one ever questioned him. This wasn't by accident, it was calculated. Dexter knew that if he appeared approachable and trustworthy, he could keep people from looking too closely. The small acts of kindness, the easy banter, and the seemingly innocent jokes all worked to mask the predator lurking beneath. But not everyone at Miami Metro was fooled. Sergeant James Dokes saw something in Dexter that didn't sit right. From the very beginning, Dokes was suspicious of him. While everyone else laughed at Dexter's jokes and praised his work ethic, Dokes noticed the coldness in Dexter's eyes and the lack of genuine emotion behind his carefully constructed facade. To Dokes, Dexter wasn't harmless or quirky. He was dangerous, and Dokes wasn't the kind of man to let something like that slide. Dexter knew Dokes was a threat, and he handled him in the only way he knew how, by turning the tables. When Dokes got too close to uncovering Dexter's secret, Dexter framed him as the Bay Harbor Butcher, planting evidence and spinning a narrative that painted Dokes as a dangerous killer. The setup was flawless. Dexter didn't just neutralize the one person who saw through him, he destroyed Dokes' reputation, leaving him with no way to defend himself. By the time the dust settled, Dokes was gone, and Dexter walked away without a scratch, his mask of normalcy firmly intact. Maria LaGuerta's fate was equally tragic. As a sharp and ambitious lieutenant, she began to piece together clues that pointed to Dexter's dark secret. Her suspicions grew, and she launched an investigation that put her career and reputation on the line. Dexter, however, wasn't about to let her unravel everything he had worked so hard to build. He systematically discredited her, planting seeds of doubt among her colleagues and making her appear desperate and unstable. When her investigation got too close to the truth, Dexter silenced her permanently, staging her death in a way that ensured no one would question the official story. Like Dokes, LaGuerta became another casualty in Dexter's relentless pursuit of self-preservation. Dexter Morgan's relationship with his son, Harrison, is perhaps the most heartbreaking example of his manipulative nature. For most people, becoming a parent is a chance to leave behind their mistakes, to build a better future through their children. But Dexter was not like most people. Instead of seeing Harrison as a child who needed love and stability, Dexter viewed him as an extension of himself, a successor who could carry forward his legacy of darkness. This perspective tainted every aspect of their relationship and led to a devastating betrayal of the purest form of trust, a child's love for their parent. Harrison's childhood was anything but normal. From the very beginning, he was surrounded by death and trauma. Born into the chaos of Dexter's life, he lost his mother, Rita, in one of the most horrifying moments of the series. Rita's murder at the hands of the Trinity Killer not only left Harrison motherless, but also marked the beginning of his exposure to the grim reality of Dexter's double life. Instead of shielding his son from his dark world, Dexter brought him closer to it, all under the guise of protection. But this so-called protection was never truly about Harrison. It was about Dexter's inability to let go of his darkness. Rather than providing a safe and nurturing environment for his son, Dexter's parenting was shaped by his twisted worldview. He began to see signs of his dark tendencies in Harrison, interpreting the boy's struggles as proof that he was destined to follow in his father's footsteps. Instead of seeking help for Harrison or working to ensure he grew up free of the shadows that haunted their family, Dexter took this as validation of his choices. In his mind, Harrison's pain wasn't a cry for help. It was a sign that they were the same, two damaged souls bound by a shared darkness. This mindset led Dexter to one of his most devastating acts of manipulation. Under the pretense of protecting Harrison, Dexter began involving him in his deadly schemes. He rationalized his actions by telling himself that he was teaching Harrison how to survive in a cruel world, but the truth was far more selfish. By pulling Harrison into his twisted orbit, Dexter was trying to justify his existence. He wanted to believe that his darkness could serve a purpose, and Harrison became the unwitting pawn in that narrative. So, what are your thoughts on this? Let us know in the comments below.